It just, oh, it doesn't sound weird? It sounds all right? Okay. Good. Yeah, well, I've got weird ears, so it makes sense that I'm prone. Yeah. All right, James chapter 5 and verse 8. James says, you also be patient. You also, as in, since the farmers are patient, you also be patient. The farmers are patient in the previous verse. Since they're patient, you also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Establish your hearts. That literally means to stabilize your hearts. We talked about this a little bit last week. In fact, we jumped around a lot last week, so we're kind of moving backwards so that we can move forwards. Establish your hearts. It means to stabilize your hearts, right? Your hearts are wishy-washy, and the Lord does not want our hearts to be wishy-washy. He wants them to be stable. We talked a lot about last week the idea of regulating our emotions, and James is going to go into that a little bit deeper in the next couple of verses. But suffice it to say, we need to decide within our minds what we're going to do. How many verses talk about deciding within your minds whom you're going to serve? Joshua 24 and verse 15, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Choose you this day whom you're going to serve. 2 Kings 18 and verse 24. 1 Kings 18 and verse 24, Elijah says, how long will you falter between two opinions? If Baal be God, serve him, but if the Lord be God, serve him. How long are you going to go back and forth on these opinions? You need to decide what you're going to hold to, whom you're going to serve. Matthew 6 and verse 24, you cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve two masters. We need to decide within our minds and within our hearts whom we're going to serve. Establish your hearts. Be patient like the farmer and establish your hearts, knowing that you are eventually going to reap what you sow, knowing that eventually you're going to have a good harvest, a good reward for your efforts. And notice what he says at the end of the verse 8 there. Why should you establish your hearts? For the coming of the Lord is at hand. All right, it doesn't matter how many seasons we got beneath our belt. All right, we're all just one breath away from eternity. And it doesn't matter whether or not Jesus waits a total of 2,025 years or if he waits another 20,000 years for his return. Eternity is going to be far bigger in expanse than whatever time there is on earth. Establish your hearts, because the coming of the Lord is at hand. It is near, whether it is 2,000 years from now or 20,000 years from now or 2 seconds from now. The coming of the Lord is at hand. We need to decide now what we're going to do. Behold, now is the day of salvation. So that's what James is talking about here in James 5, verse 8. Any thoughts, questions, or comments on verse 8? Now starting in verse 9. Verse 9 through the end of the chapter, so for the rest of the book of James, is really one big application. And that one big application is go to God, specifically go to God in prayer, right? But there's a lot of different facets of that one big application. So James 5 and verse 9, we start to get one of those facets. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. All right, so we're talking about this idea of coming to the Lord, right? Do not grumble do not grumble against one another. Do not. What's another word for grumble? Complain. Yeah, do not grumble, complain, gripe, nitpick one another. Right? Sometimes all we see is fault in other people, and James says, do not find fault in other people. You know, obviously we all have faults, right? So we should not be looking at other people with a magnifying glass, trying to just wait for them to slip up. Why should we not? What does James say here in this verse? Why should we not grumble against others? That's right. It could be held against you. Rita, what were you saying? Lest you be condemned. That's right. For the judge is where? All right. The judge is standing at the door. I don't know if anybody here has ever had this experience, but I've had it in 2 places that I've lived, where I've had neighbors that are so loud whenever they argue with each other that you can hear them. Whenever I was growing up, some neighbors who lived across the street from us would argue so loud that you could hear them inside your own house.
Were they outside?
Sometimes, not always.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's loud.
yeah, yep. And same goes in the last apartment that I lived in before I moved here. We had some neighbors who lived diagonally from us, so we were in a upstairs, and there was 4 apartments per level, and a couple that lived diagonally from us, you could hear them when they were even inside, right? You can sometimes hear. Anybody ever had that experience before where you can hear? Yeah. It's a boy, and it can get some sensitive material, right? You can hear some nasty things during those kind of encounters. Isn't that strange? Isn't that backwards that the people that you supposedly love most, you would talk to like that? Isn't that odd? And yet they do. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Right? The Lord knows what we're saying to people, even if we're not really loud about it. He can hear right through that door. He can hear how we're talking to the people that we, again, supposedly love most. All right, who are the people that we're supposed to love most? Not just our physical family, but who else? Our spiritual family. Does the Lord want us grumbling and complaining and bickering and fighting with our spiritual family? No, absolutely not.
I think some people feel like if they grumble and fuss and get mad at their friends, those people will walk away.
Yeah.
Your family's going to love you no matter what. You can treat them however you want.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another aspect
Yeah.
of this that I thought I think is interesting is like in general, grumbling and complaining gives you a sense that you've accomplished something.
Yeah.
That you've talked it out, you've talked about it when you actually haven't.
That's right.
But because usually solving the problem requires more internal work on
That's
your
right.
part and on the other person, and people it's not comfortable and don't want to do the work, so then they'll complain.
Yeah.
Because it makes them feel like they've done something.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. Right. So, why do we? Edie, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. Why do we attack the people that again we supposedly love most? Is because they don't have a choice anymore, right? So we can kind of let loose. And why do we do it with the people that we love most? Is because we don't want to work on the real problems and we want easy solutions, right?
But there are families, I would say, where they haven't talked to each other
Yeah.
in decades.
That's right. Yeah.
Because when I worked at the hospital, I would see
Yeah.
And so sometimes people do break from their,
Yeah.
biological family or whatever.
Right. Well, yeah. So sometimes people, cut themselves off. Sometimes people are shunned. Sometimes people bottle it up. Sometimes people are explosive. Right. They're all just different responses to the same hurt that people feel. Right. Within their family unit. So suffice it to say, sometimes it's not just grumbling that's the problem, right? There's an underlying issue, right? And there's a healthy way and there's an unhealthy way to deal with whatever those underlying issues are. Okay, so grumbling is one of the unhealthy ways, right? Bottling up is one of those unhealthy ways. Shunning people is one of those unhealthy ways. When we're talking about the church family, how should we talk to somebody that we disagree with?
So respectfully and in love.
Yeah.
And to them, not to other people.
That's right. Respectfully in love, right? We sometimes call that what? Church, starts with a D. Church discipline. Right? what's the first step of church discipline? When your brother has sinned against you, what are you supposed to do? Go shout out from the mountaintops, "This brother sinned against me." Yeah, and then what? 2 or 3 witnesses, right? And then what? Bring everybody in, and then what? And you cut them off, right? There comes a time when even family members, even the physical family members, just need to be cut off, right? But there's a process to it. There's a healthy way of going at it, right? And that healthy way of going at it is to give them every benefit of the doubt. Okay, maybe this one-on-one isn't enough, so I'll gang up on you per se, right? To see if you're in error, or maybe I'm the one in error. So I'll bring 2 or 3 witnesses that are as unbiased as possible. And if that doesn't work, then I'm going to bring the whole church with me. I'm going to bring the whole family and talk about it. We're going to have just a grand old intervention, right? There's a healthy way of going at this. That's right. Speaking the truth in love towards those that are without. Bearing one another's burdens, right? We that are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness, considering yourself. Galatians 6 and verse 1, right? This when we go and we are talking to somebody over sensitive things, we need to talk in such a way that is not high and mighty in.
One of the ways to approach that is to, when you confront somebody about something, is to not use like, you did this,
that's right,
you did that, but instead use I language and say, I feel this way
right,
in this because of this.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So you take it on you that because maybe they didn't intend that, or maybe
that's right.
whatever, and it was just you have to own your
yes.
But that opens up, because otherwise if you go the person automatically is going to feel attacked, and they're going to.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not going to go well.
That's right. Okay, so we've wandered away from my notes, but now we've come back to my notes. So in my notes, here's what I've got written. There's a difference between grumbling and critiquing. What's critiquing?
Critiquing is helpful.
Yeah, critiquing is helpful, right? And what makes it helpful? You might be saying the exact same thing. In fact, we'll go read in the Bible in which 2 different people, or groups of people, came up to Moses in particular and said virtually the exact same thing. But there was one key difference between how they said it. Right? Let's go read that. Let's go read Numbers 16, verses 1 through 3. This scenario is grumbling or complaining. Numbers 16, verses 1 through 3. The Bible reads, "Now Korah," anybody ever hear of Korah before in the Bible? Korah is known for something in particular. Anybody know?
He gets swallowed up.
Yeah, he got swallowed up by the earth. Yes. Right? Is that what you get? I heard someone's voice over here. Yeah. So the earth opened up, and Korah and his fellow rebels, sometimes he's known for starting a rebellion, his fellow rebels are swallowed by the earth, right? So, 16 verse 1, Korah the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men, and they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of the renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron. Notice that, against Moses and Aaron. Right? That's a little tidbit that's a little hint for us to know kind of what's happening here. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" Somebody summarize what they said. Put it in more modernized words. What was Kohath and his friends saying? You think you're better than everybody else. What else? You're working too hard. You think you're better than everybody else, and you're working too hard. We can help bear your burden, right? You're not better than the rest of us. Okay. Keep Kohath in mind. Was Kohath grumbling or critiquing? He was grumbling, right? The Lord is going to show that later on in the chapter, which we won't read, right? Because what happens to Kohath and his friends? Swallowed up by the earth, right? So they're definitely grumbling. They're definitely complaining. But there was another fella who came up to Moses and said virtually the exact same thing. Let's backtrack to Exodus 18. Yeah, it's his father-in-law, yeah. Did you read my notes, Rita? Exodus 18, verse 14. Exodus 18, verse 14. What's his father-in-law's name? Jethro. Exodus 18, beginning in verse 14. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he had done for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" Drop down to verse 17. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you do is not good." It's exactly what Korah said. The thing that you are doing is not good. Verse 18, "Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out, for this thing is too much for you." Korah said the exact same thing. "You are not able to perform it yourself. Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you." What's the difference between what they're saying? What's the difference between what Korah said and Jethro? Came from his father-in-law. Okay, so you have a source. That's right. So instead of, talking from below Moses in authority, you're talking from above Moses in authority. What else, though? Think about that word against, right? That Numbers hinted for us.
Jethro shows concern.
It's
Genuine concern.
That's right.
And a solution.
One word can summarize that. Tone. The tone is different. There's a difference between coming up to someone and coming up against someone. There's a tone difference here. What's the difference between grumbling and critiquing? It's tone. Is it wrong to grumble against your brethren, to complain against your brethren? Is it wrong to critique them, though? What's the difference? Is tone. The way they used the exact same words, didn't they? What you're doing is too much for you. It is not good that you're doing this. You alone are sitting up here. The exact same words. What's the difference? Tone. Okay, whenever we have an ought against our brethren, there is a way to go and talk to them. All right, and that way is, as Paul would put it in Galatians 6 and verse 1, with the spirit of gentleness or with the spirit of meekness, considering yourself. You need to come at them in a humble attitude, not a high and mighty and haughty attitude. Any thoughts or questions on this?
Some people, though, I don't care if their tone's good.
Yes. Yeah.
They can say the exact same, but it aggravates you. Somebody else, it would not.
Part of the reason why it's 2 or 3 witnesses and then the church, right? Because sometimes it doesn't really matter what's said, how it's said. Sometimes it matters who's saying it, right?
I think the basis of trust of the relationship is very important.
Right.
And Jethro and Moses, Moses lived with Jethro for 40 years?
40 years, yeah.
So they have a solid,
Yes.
obviously, basis of
Yes.
relationship.
Right. Yeah, and that goes back to a common saying that we have in the United States. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? The deeper the relationship, and obviously this is his father-in-law, right? And they lived together for 40 years, worked together alongside each other for 40 years, right? Even if they did not see eye to eye on everything, after 40 years of working with somebody, are you gonna be able to hear them out a little bit more? Well, yeah, right. As opposed to this young kid on the block who doesn't know what's going on, who all he does is complain about you. Are you going to listen to him? Well, no. Right. There's another important difference between Jethro and Korah. Korah wanted Moses and Aaron deposed entirely. What does deposed mean? Removed of power, right? What does Jethro want? Rita, you knew about him.
He was concerned about his health.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, okay, so there were 2 to 3 million people. That's the estimate, because there were 600,000 men of war, so men eligible to go to war. So that's ages 20 to, I think, 55 at this time. 600,000, based off that estimate, they have 2 to 3 million people. And 2 to 3 million people every day, whenever they have any problems, whether it's, someone spat in my food, or, hey, this guy murdered my wife, right? All the problems. Guess who they're going to? One person. 3 million people are going to one person to solve all their problems. Who is it? It's Moses, right? And Jethro doesn't say, you know what, Moses, it's time to depose you. It's, we need somebody else who can handle 3 million people. What Moses says is, we need to have leaders, people under thousands, people over hundreds, people over tens, right? So that there's a bit of a hierarchy, right? So Jethro comes up with a solution. What does Korah come up with? Yeah, get them out, right? So there's another important part of tone too, is, if you're coming up to somebody and all you are doing is criticizing them, and you're not bringing up any solutions, is that helpful? No, it's not helpful. Other thoughts, questions, comments on this? Okay, so is it wrong to critique someone? No, in fact, we're supposed to, right? You who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness. Restore the weak. In fact, James is going to leave off on this thought for his entire book. What's the final thought of the book of James? If any of you see your brother erring, know that one who converts a brother has done something. What is it? James 5, last 2 verses. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Right? That's the final thrust of the book of James, is to bring somebody back to the light. That's exactly what Jethro was doing. There's a difference between critiquing and grumbling. We should be critiquing our brethren whenever they are starting to err, whenever they're starting to go off that straight and narrow. But should we complain against them? No, we shouldn't complain against them. Eric Owens, a couple PTPs ago, Polishing the Pulpit, a couple years ago, he said he had a whole sermon that was called Turning the Straight and Narrow into the Thin and Impossible. What do you think that sermon was about? Right, the straight and narrow path, is it easy or hard to keep onto the straight and narrow path? Right, so if you make the straight and narrow path thin and impossible, well, it's in the word there, right? Impossible. So that's what we do to our brethren sometimes. Like what James was saying earlier, we start to bind where God has not bound. We start to make ourselves the 3 branches of government, the executioner, the judicial, and the legislative. We start to say, you know what? God's word doesn't go far enough. You need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, and eventually it's impossible for our brethren to stay faithful, living under our rules. That's complaining. That's grumbling. Should we grumble? Should we complain? Should we bind where God is not bound? Should we make it more difficult on our brethren? God forbid. Establish your hearts. Don't keep going back and forth between what I think should be done and what God thinks should be done. You need to just stick with what God says and live peaceably with your brother as much as possible. All right, let's see. So, verse 9, do not grumble against one another, brother, unless you be condemned. Behold, the judge at the door is standing. Any other thoughts, questions on verse 9 before we go on to verse 10? Verse 10, my brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Again, we talked about this one a little bit last week, right? So we kind of jumped ahead last week, and so now we're going behind to work our way forward. The prophets, who's that talking about? Prophets from the Old Testament, that's right. What are some of their names? We just had a VBS about one of them. Jonah, all right. Daniel. Jeremiah, yeah. Yeah. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, even David, right? Take those prophets, for example. What happened to those prophets? Did they have easy lives? What happened to Daniel? Did he have an easy life? No. All we really remember is the lion's den. You know what else happened to him? He was enslaved at like 15 years old and taken to another country. You know what else happened to him? At about the age of 90, he became one of 3 presidents of Babylon. And then, like 20 years later, at 110 years old, is when he was thrown into the lion's den. Right? You think Daniel had a hard life? From 15 years old to 110 years old, he had struggles. What about Isaiah? Tradition says that Isaiah was sawn in half. The traditions are a little hazy. There's a lot of different versions of how Isaiah died, but there are 2 things in common with Isaiah's death. Despite the various versions, those 2 things is that he was sawn in half and he was hiding in a tree. Right? You think about that. Hiding in a tree until they cut you down. What happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, going back to Daniel? Right, they were thrown into a furnace. Yeah, with Daniel. What about Jeremiah? Jeremiah, probably the worst thing that happened to him personally was he was thrown into a pit, all the while he listened to the battle going outside of the city walls in Jerusalem. And then he got to behold something that we don't want to behold. Right? Sometimes we talk about the fall of America and it kind of sends a shiver down our spines in order to think about what it would look like if the United States fell. Guess what Jeremiah saw? Jeremiah saw the collapse of his homeland. Right? He wanted to die. These prophets, they didn't have easy lives. You know what God says through James? Take them as an example of their patience. You know what? If Daniel, for 95 years, can endure hardship at the hands of an oppressive empire, do you think I can put up with my brethren who are in Christ? Don't grumble and complain against your brethren. You know what? The prophets endure it much harder hardships. You know what? We've got it pretty good. We've got it pretty good. That's not to say that we can't critique them. That's not to say that we should tolerate false doctrine. But in matters of opinion, don't grumble and complain against them. Thoughts, questions, comments?
We should be ashamed because there's some right now in India that are having trials that we could not even imagine.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
And ours seems so petty sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, I think it was India in particular. Pat tells a story. He's preached when some Muslims have stood in the back of the church building holding semi-automatic rifles. Right? That's kind of like, the worst thing that we have to fear in the United States is mass shootings. And statistically speaking, do you know how rare mass shootings are? I mean, we hear about them every couple of months. But statistically speaking, you know how rare mass shootings are? Super rare. Less than 1% of all gun violent, all acts of gun violence are from mass shootings. All right, super rare. Most gun violence is gang-on-gang related, right? Or hunting accidents. Those are the 2. I researched it back in 2015, 2016, so those statistics might be a little off. But anyway, that's what we fear the most, right? Is mass shootings, and we can't even begin to grapple with in our minds, what people in India are going through, what people in China are going through, what Christians in China are going through, what Christians in the Middle East are going through, what Christians in the first century went through. But even if we were going through the same hardships that the Christians in the first century went to, where they were literally coming into church buildings, pulling people out, and murdering them there on the spot, who did that happen to? Starts with an S. Stephen. Right? And Paul was going to Damascus to do the very same thing. Even if we were going through those exact same things, does that give us a right to grumble and complain against one another? You know what Paul says in Galatians 5 and verse 4? But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed. Right? You know what Jesus had to say about it? A city or a kingdom or a house divided against itself, what can it not do? It can't stand. Right? And so if we start biting and devouring one another, if we start grumbling and complaining against one another, if we divide the Lord's house, is it going to be able to stand? No, we'll be consumed, as Paul said. Right? We'll fall, as Paul said. We need to be beacons of light, and that means being patient with our brethren.
Well, I agree that the trials they're facing in India are horrible. We also have to be careful to not invalidate or belittle other people's suffering.
That's right.
And not saying, but you're not in India.
That's right.
Killed, because that will shut them down.
Right.
Also, as whatever they're feeling or going through is not valid.
Yeah.
And then we are not a source of help to them.
That's right. That's right. 1 Corinthians 10:13, there hath no temptation taking you such as is common to man. Well, okay, so temptations are at big range, right? Sometimes the worst temptation that I'll ever go through or someone will ever go through is someone spat in my food today, right? Is that really that bad? No. But say it was in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. Do I think that's really bad? Yes, right? Or even today, right? If you went to a restaurant and someone spat in your food, right, you'd be pretty peeved, right? But even though our hardships might not be nearly as difficult, yeah, we don't want to invalidate our hardships. They're still hard, right? Yeah. But God's faithful no matter the type of hardship. Okay, next week is singing, and then 2 weeks.